In this nugget, you and I get to discuss and then demonstrate how high availability in a Citrix environment can prevent a single failure from stopping our business. Let's begin. We can build in fault tolerance. And from the movie Contact, I love one of the quotes that says, "Why build one when you can build two for twice the price?" So for fault tolerance, what we can do with the NetScaler is we can have two NetScalers for fault tolerance. So perhaps this is NetScaler 1, and then we have another NetScaler 2. And if we have about the hardware, the licensing, the interfaces, and the version of code. Now, there are some exceptions where you can have slightly different versions of code, and you might use that as you do an in-flight upgrade where you have one failover unit, you upgrade that one, then you upgrade the second one. But as a general rule for an operating fault-tolerant pair, we want to have two that are the synchronized. And what's supposed to happen is that the configuration from NS1, or virtually all of the configuration from NS1, gets synchronized down to NS2, so that either one of them could take over if needed. However, if done incorrectly, and we sync it this way, which means that the almost blank config of the NS2 now is replicated over to NS1, that is an absolute disaster. So I'll walk you through some precautionary steps that we can take to assist in preventing against that. Now, if there are two NetScalers in a high availability pair, and we're doing active passive, it means that one of these NetScalers is doing all the work, and the other one is just making sure that although the primary is going to be actively engaged and responding on behalf of these IP addresses, the IP address that still stays unique to each of these NetScalers is the NetScaler IP. So if the primary ends in .225 and the second NetScaler has the last octet of 2.35, those do not change. And that's a good thing. So at any given day, you or I, sitting at our workstation, we could go ahead and connect to the NetScaler IP address of either device 1 or device 2, regardless if it's active in primary or not, and connect to that device. Also, what I found very handy is that if we have a shortcut, and most people do in their browser, that connects them to the NetScaler, what we might choose to do is have our SNPs be manageable. So we would enable GUI management capabilities on our subnet IP addresses. And we discussed the details on how to do that in one of our previous nuggets in this course. We could then go ahead and point to a subnet IP for management. So let's say, as an example, that our subnet IP is .2 the configuration that we've done so far, and we want to keep it. We'll save our config, make sure it's saved and backed up, and then we'll add VPX2 into the mix. The NSIP address for VPX2 is 235 for the last octet, and for VPX1 it is 225. And then we have a SNP address that is currently on VPX1 that's at 226. So we begin on VPX1, and just to verify we're on the correct device, we can go up here to Info, and from the drop-down it shows us the IP address. That's the NetScaler IP address along with the host name of VPX-1. So we'll go ahead and save our config. We'll say yes. Now our configuration is saved. We're also going to go ahead under System and go down to Backup and Restore, and we can create another backup as well before we do the failover configuration. So to create a backup, we'll click on Backup. We'll label it. We'll say we want a full backup and click on Backup. So let's take a road trip and go check out VPX2. Now on VPX2, because it hasn't been fully configured yet, it's walking me through this welcome wizard. And I'm simply going to say Continue. And if we go to Info for this, its name is VPX2. Its NetScaler IP address ends in .235. And while we're here on VPX2, let's do a little training to make sure that edit this guy as well. I'm going to hedge my bets. I'm going to go to Edit, and let's say that we want this guy to stay primary, which is effective telling this NetScaler to not replicate and pull over somebody else's config and slap it in instead of the beautiful one that you currently have. And then with that in place, I'll go down to the bottom and click on OK. And now let's add high availability. And let's put these two NetScalers together as a high availability pair for fault tolerance. So we'll click on Add. I'm going to put the remote node as 235. And I'm going to specify the credentials on that remote system as well. So in my lab, it's NSRoot, and the password is NSRoot. And that allows us to configure both sides at the same time. Currently in progress regarding the synchronization. So what's happening is that most of the config, and I say most because things like the NetScaler IP address is not replicated, but everything else is, like the VIPs and the SNPs and the MIPS, are being replicated from the primary over to the secondary. So if we click on the refresh icon, now we have a success message. So now that these NetScalers know who's who, for example, they both agree that VPX1 is the primary, and we could verify that too. Let's make a road trip over. VPX2 is a standby replica of VPX1. So let's leave this NetScaler. Let's go back to VPX1, and let's change the node states. So here on VPX1, which we're sitting at, I'm going to right-click. We'll select Edit, and we'll go ahead and specify that we just want him to participate in high availability. Don't force yourself to be the primary no matter what. If you fail, we want it to fail. We want the other VPX to take over and provide functionality for the network in the event that VPX1 has a problem. So we'll scroll to the bottom, we'll click OK, And then we'd want to do that same treatment for VPX2. So we'll make a road trip real quick over to VPX2. We'll go under System and High Availability. And let's tell VPX2 what those are. We can go down to Network and go to IPs. And let's go ahead and connect to 192.168.1.226. And see, the beautiful thing is if we connect to the 226, whichever device happens to be primary and active, we're going to connect to that device. So if there's a failover condition and we weren't aware of it, select the VPX1, which is primary, and under Action, we could say Force Failover. And it gives us a little warning that this may interrupt a little traffic for a few moments. We're going to click on Yes, and it said the failover started successfully. So in the background, what happened? No longer going to be mapped or should be associated with those IP addresses. So we are going to re-authenticate to the same IP address of .226, and it looks very similar. It says, hey, we're connected to the primary node in this HA pair. However, if we go up here to information, we are connected to VPX2, which is now primary. And we can see that by going to System and selecting High Availability, and it indicates that VPX2 is the primary. And the only address that's not the responsibility now of the primary in this pair is the Netscaler IP address that will always be exclusively maintained and responded to by VPX1. And in this nugget, we have discussed and demonstrated how high availability can prevent a single failure from stopping our business. One additional recommendation I would make for you is to practice with failover in a lab or test environment well before you ever roll it out in production. I have had a lot of fun in this nugget. I'm glad that you joined me for it. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.